Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Suhaila Ibrahim, and I would like to give my account of the Zaria massacre and everything that I saw during the massacre, and a few incidences that followed as well. So, the Zaria massacre happened between 12th to 14th December for the most part, and at least my account would be mostly from between that time. On the 12th, on Saturday, I remembered that I got up that day quite early, actually, because we had a few things going on that we had to plan for. One of them being that day was the first of Rabiul Awal, and usually there's a flag hoisting ceremony that happens on that day, and we had to prepare to go there, and also there was a few things that needed to be done about that. And also the day before that, there was an attack on some of the brothers in a small town nearby Zaria called Gabari. And during that attack, a lot of people were injured and some were killed. And I believe 3 of the people that were killed during that attack previously in the nearby town were brought to the Husseiniya Baqiyatullah, which was the center where most of the central activities of the Islamic movement would take place in Zaria especially. And they were brought there to have their bodies prepared and their funeral prayers said, which was going to take place a little bit earlier than the event that was already scheduled to take place that day. So, and also on the same day, I had my little brother who was coming back from a conference he attended in Lebanon, along with another brother who's now a Shaheed, actually, Sheikh Qasim Umar. And so we had a few things to do basically that day, and I woke up early and I was trying to make sure that we have something prepared for them because they're coming back from their trip, so that they will, have something to eat when they come back home. And then also we had to prepare to go for the two events, the funeral prayers and also the flag hoisting. At around 1 a.m., a little after 1 a.m., maybe 1:30, something like that, I got a call from one of the brothers that was in Husseiniya at the time that said that there's army personnel that were kept in front of the Husseiniya right opposite the building, and they were asked what they were doing there, but they said that they were there on orders and they had to be there or something like that. And I asked the person to keep me in the loop about what's happening at Husseiniya, because we assumed that they were there to attack. It wasn't the first time that events or activities of the Islamic movement have been attacked, and it wasn't the first time that the army also has attacked. Just nothing as terrible as what happened in 2015, but it's happened previously. And like I said, the attack in the nearby town the day before also made the situation a bit more tense, I suppose, because, well, we all expected that it was a follow-up on that, even though that attack was carried out by, I think, thugs, but they were definitely supported by the police at the time, because there were police in the town. At least that's what I heard, and they didn't do anything to interfere with the attacking of the people that was happening, of the brothers that was happening there. And so I was trying to keep in touch with this brother who called to get an idea of what's happening. And around that same time, after we got the call, my two other younger brothers who were also killed during this massacre went to the Husseiniya, and also because they heard this news and wanted to check out for themselves what's happening there. So about 15 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes maximum, I got a another phone call, and around the time my brothers were already there. And the brother who called was telling me that there's even more soldiers there at that point, and that they've approached the Husseiniya with a bunch of vehicles and things like that. And he also informed me that some of the brothers were talking to them about why they're coming towards the Husseiniya. So amidst all that, the discussion that was going on, which it wasn't being explained to me what was going on there in details, but at least I understood that some people were talking to some army personnel. And amidst all that, as I was on the phone, I heard gunshots, and the person that I was on the phone with said that they were shooting in the sky, but then turned off the phone a few seconds later. And later on, I tried to contact the same person, and I heard that they actually shot at a bunch of the people there, and they injured a bunch, possibly killed some, and also took some of the bodies. And so when this shooting was happening, so there's a road there, and most of the people that were on the road nearest to the Husseiniya were trying to go into the building, and then whoever was cut off from there was trying to leave the place. And so it turns out that my little brothers, were all on the other side of the road, so they ended up leaving because the army were shooting at people there. And some of the people that went into the building included people who were injured from the shootings. And the rest of the people that were cut off from being able to leave or go into the building were taken by the army. So some of the injured people and also people who were believed to have been killed at the time, all were taken by the army. Their bodies were being taken by the army. And while this was all happening, I went in to speak with my mother, and she told me that she also heard about what's going on, and she just spoke to my dad, and he's going to Dar Rahma, which is a place that 3 of my brothers that were killed the year previously were buried there, and also some of the shuhada that were also killed around the same time during the Quds Day massacre in 2014 were also buried there. And usually my dad goes there on that same 1st of Rabiul Awal. He usually goes there, and he heard the news of the shootings, but we all thought that it was another one of their attacks. Maybe they just shot at the time, and perhaps that was it, right? And maybe, the people that were injured could be reached and taken to a hospital and all that. So anyway, we went to the Dar Rahma, and while we were there, my brothers who left the site of Husseiniya when the shooting was happening met up with us there. And then from there, we all went back home. And while we were on the way home, that's when we were being called up. All of us were receiving different calls, and people were trying to confirm what was happening. Some people sent me, like a friend of mine sent me a news link that says that that apparently, that was what the news was saying, that there was an attempted assassination on the chief of army staff, and that apparently they are claiming that the brothers and sisters at Husseiniya were trying to kill the chief of army staff, even though they actually were trying to approach the building, and that's what was happening before they started shooting. So after this going through all this, and also being in contact with different people trying to figure out what's actually happening both on the ground in Husseiniya, and also people called in to check with us to see if the news is, because the news seemed quite absurd actually, and a lot of people were calling to just figure out what was happening. And during that period of time, we still thought that maybe it was going to be possible to go get the injured, maybe take them to the hospital. Perhaps even the event that was scheduled to take place would possibly still take place. We were still all kind of ready to possibly go to Husseiniya because nobody knew the extent of what would actually take place that day. So when it got late and they kept actually bringing more soldiers and they laid siege on the building, it became clear that it wasn't going to be possible, not even just to get the, injured out, but also to just go there at all, because they cut off all the roads that we can go through to access the building. And at this point, it was quite late in the evening, and a lot of people who were coming, some people who got the news of what's happening, some of the brothers and sisters who got the news of what's happening in Husseiniya were coming to Zaria, but also they couldn't go there. So a lot of them were coming to our home. And then some people who were also already on their way to attend the ceremony that was scheduled to take place that day were also coming straight to our house at the time, because they all got a lot of people were getting the news, and there was an influx of people there. And during this time in the evening, I think after about Maghrib, because it's quite cold during that time in Zaria, it usually gets cold, and there's a lot of people, and they're mostly outside. I remembered that someone contacted me and said that, they need to go buy a few things and also maybe make tea for people and things like that, so that people will stay warm, because there's a lot of people outside. And all that was happening. And for a few hours while we were there that night, it was quite calm at home. There was nothing particularly happening. All of the concern was diverted at what's happening in Husseiniya. How is it possible to reach them? Maybe get especially the injured people out of the building, and also to figure out what's even happening, because at the time the news was going crazy, especially here with NTA and a few other news, national news. They were broadcasting all kinds of things that weren't true. And between that time, we tried to kind of put out whatever is possible to explain this is not what's happening. And that's all that was happening that day. At about 10 p.m., I think after 10 p.m., maybe around 10:30, when everything was seemingly calm at home, we heard gunshots. And from the time that those gunshots started at around 10 p.m., 10:30 maybe, we asked what was going on. It turned out that the army had sent more soldiers, and they were coming towards our house. And for a period of time after it started, a lot of people were shot. They couldn't actually just come straight to the house, because there's a lot of people, as I've mentioned, that have been arriving over the hours throughout that evening, and also from that afternoon throughout the evening into the night. People were still arriving at our house. And so there were a lot of people there. And so it turns out when they started shooting, they shot some of the people that were at the beginning of the street. And for a period of time, they would shoot. I would say maybe they would shoot for a period of time, maybe pause and then continue shooting. And they kept doing that for a while, I think well after midnight, at around maybe 1 a.m. or something like that. Some of the shooting calmed down, mostly because it turns out that, it looks like they were seeing clearly what they were shooting at. So a lot of the lights on the streets were turned off so that they wouldn't see the street. It was pretty dark because it was late at night anyway. So when it was dark, the shooting kind of calmed down. A few times in between, they shot at some people, but it wasn't much. And most of the night, it was quiet. The shooting quieted down. They didn't leave, though. Most of the injured people, some people were shot and killed right there from the initial shooting, and some people were injured. And so a lot of the injured and also the people that were killed were all being brought down to, our house, but there's a part of our house that is not really, it's a detached part of the house. They were being brought into there to be taken care of. And all this while, it wasn't possible to get them out anyway. It wasn't possible to get them out because the army was everywhere. It wasn't possible to get them to any hospital or something of that sort. Also, all the while, again, they kept the siege on the Husseiniya while the shooting was happening in our home. So for most of the night, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was pretty cold. And, mostly we just tried to prepare a lot of tea for people that were outside. Some people were coming in as well. But the house couldn't contain everybody that was there anyway. So we were making some tea to distribute so that people will stay warm, because it was very, very cold outside. And most of the night we were in contact with different people who were trying to, get a picture of what's happening, who were from other places, maybe from other states, from other countries as well. People were contacting, some journalists were also contacting just a bunch of us, different people like me, my parents, and maybe some of my siblings as well. I think around, I forgot to mention that my brother, who was away, did manage to get back home, even though when he was coming back home, the route, he had to actually take another route because of the siege that they placed on Husseiniya and also the roads leading up to that. So coming from the airport, that they couldn't actually get to our house. They had to take another route. But then they finally did get home around, I think, around 7 p.m., 6 p.m., something like that. And so at that point, myself, my parents, and 3 of my brothers were all home. And I think that some other people were at home, like my aunt was there. There's a lady that cooks for us who's also there. And I think there's my 2 sisters who were also there. And there's a few other people that were amongst the people that were present. As I mentioned, many people came. So a lot of us were being contacted, like I said, throughout the night by people trying to figure out what's happening, trying to hear updates, what's going on. Is everything okay? Are they retreating? This and that. That was generally the questions that we were getting. And because it was mostly calm, all we could obviously tell anybody about was what happened prior to that, what's going on right now. They're still there. They've blocked most of the roads, and that was about all the information that was happening at the time, everything that was happening at the time. And when it was at this point, obviously, on the 13th in the morning, around Fajr time, when after prayers, when the sun started to come up and the environment started to get bright, they continued the shooting from where they stopped. Like, they were still at the beginning of the lane, and so they continued shooting from different places. They were actually coming in from different, not just the one lane, but from other places as well. And they kept shooting at people who were there. Some of the people, most of the people who were there on the streets were being shot at. And the most that anybody could do actually to retaliate the shooting, which again, it wasn't possible to actually leave much, was just to throw maybe pebbles at them, stones or something like that. And that continued on for a few hours until I think by about 8 a.m., they were at the door. They were already at the door. The gate was locked, and they were shooting, they were ramming the gate in with cars and I think a tank, I'm not sure, but I don't think a regular car would just keep ramming into a metal door. Anyway, they closed in on the house, and there were some people that were in the vicinity who came inside at that time. So at the time when the shooting was at the walls of the house, my mother, her room was, the walls were starting to get hit by bullets. So I was informed to tell her to leave the room so that, she wouldn't maybe get hit by a stray or something. So I asked her to move, and she moved to my dad's room at the time. And in between this time, a lot of the people that were outside, even before they actually got to the gate, kept trying to convince my dad to leave the place, to try and maybe figure out, maybe to come out and see maybe if there's a place or a method to just figure out how to escape, I guess. And it wasn't, well, first of all, I don't think it was possible, but also he insisted that he wouldn't, obviously, because they were there to kill. And even if, let's say, if my dad was to slip out, if he was to slip out knowingly to everybody, first of all, it would be very clear that he slipped out, and then, of course, they would know where to go. But also, even if he slipped out, then quietly, the brothers and sisters that were outside were going to be killed while thinking they're trying to protect him, And so he insisted on not leaving, even though a lot of people kept trying to convince him to go out of the place, to leave. And during that period of time, when the army was pretty much at the doorstep of the house, I was told to come back in and try to ask my dad to come outside, and somebody was even suggesting that he hides in the car, which wasn't possible. It wasn't going to work anyway, because eventually they did, set everything on fire, including the cars. But anyway, he insisted on not doing that. He said that, these people are here to kill us, and regardless of what we do at this point, they will still kill us. Like, it doesn't matter if he goes with what the person was suggesting or if he doesn't. So, while we were there in the house, my brothers were also sent inside. So my dad told me to just sit there with them, because these people are coming in to kill anyway. We might as well be killed together. So my brothers came inside as well. They were also initially outside. They came inside the house into my dad's room, and they were also told to tell him to come, maybe try to leave, maybe hide or something like that. He asked them to also stay. Both Hamad, Haider and Humaid were all asked to stay. And then later on, my sister Zainab and Sajda also came inside, and they were also asked by my dad to stay there. So we basically just sat there, and it was, like as I said, they were already at the doorstep. There were a few people in the house. Most of them were in, there's a room that is, it's usually called Zori, but it's like a reception that my dad normally meets with people there. And a lot of people were inside there. My aunt was also inside there, because initially they all went outside before the army closed down on the house. So they all went into that room, and there were a few other people in another room that the CCTV feed is normally viewed there. So as soon as they broke into the house, they shot at a bunch of people outside. As later on, when we were being taken out of the house, we saw the bodies there. And we heard something that sounded like a bomb, and it turns out that it was the room with the CCTV feed. It sounded like they threw a grenade in there or something like that, because there was an explosion. And shortly after that, they shot into the room, the other room that I mentioned, with my aunt inside and a few other people there. And they shot almost everybody there. Maybe a few, there were a few people who survived who were later killed. I think most of them were later killed. But after they shot into the room, they set the room on fire. And I believe that was the beginning of the fire that they set to the house. And all this while we were in my dad's room, expecting that they would burst in any moment and also kill us all. So my dad said that, we should all say our goodbyes, because we don't know who will live or who would survive and who wouldn't. So we did that and said some prayers. And after saying a few prayers, we all went in sujood, and were expecting to be killed, because they were making announcements that they would demolish the house over our heads, and they would shoot RPGs into the house and all that. And when all of this was taking place, we heard a lot of gunshots, most of which weren't very close by. Some of it was coming from far. And we also heard people walking on the roofs. So as we were there expecting to, for the house to be brought down on our heads or something like that, or for them to burst in and kill everybody, there was smoke coming in from the ceilings, and it looked like that's when we actually figured out that they set fire to the house, and that the smoke has already gotten there. The fire has gotten to the ceiling of the room. So we left the room, and we went out to my mother's living room. And when we went there, it didn't look like they went inside. It was intact. It didn't look like anybody passed through. We actually wanted to go out through my dad's living room, but we could very clearly hear them inside the building from that door. So we went through another door. And when we went out that door, it looked like they weren't already inside. My dad even went into the bathroom there in my mom's room and performed ablution because it was around Dhuhr time at this point. I think around 1 p.m., maybe after that by a little bit. So, but shortly after, when my sister went to perform their ablution there, it looked like they saw the soldiers right behind the windows, and the walls were already, you know, they've fallen apart. The walls have fallen apart from the shooting and everything. So they came back into the living room. Somehow the soldiers didn't really come from inside again, even though it didn't look like they really passed through the living room. Like I said, it looked like everything was intact, and everywhere that we went that it looked like they were there before, it looked like they, you know, it's pretty much damaged or, you know, ransacked or something like that. So we waited there, and while we were in the living room, we noticed some people outside, right outside the door. And we opened the doors, and it turns out it was some of the brothers who survived the shooting after they got into our house. And it turns out we were hearing their footsteps on the roofs, because they went over the roofs after the shooting in the room that I mentioned, where my aunt was in, and they were the ones who told us that they initially shot into the room and then later on set fire to the room, and that they couldn't really help anybody out after the fire was set. So they left, and some of them were injured, but they went over the roof and came into that, yard. So we saw them there, and my dad asked them to come inside the living room where we were in, because it looked like the army didn't really come through there. They didn't check. So we sat there for a while. He even performed his Dhuhr prayers, and afterwards, after some minutes, maybe an hour or so, maybe a little over an hour, I'm not really sure of the time or how long it took in between, but the smoke was getting there. Initially, it was just a little smoke, and later on, there was fire in the ceiling very clearly. So we had to leave. So we went outside into the yard that I mentioned, and when we went outside, there were some bodies of some of the shuhada, some of the people that were killed, and two of them who I both know them. One of them was, I believe, covered in blood. He was covered in blood. I couldn't recognize his face very clearly, but I wasn't sure if it was, I'm thinking between two siblings, because both were killed. But he did look very distinct. I could tell who he was roughly. I mean, I could tell his family and everything, but the two siblings looked quite alike, so I wasn't sure who it was. But the other one, Shahid Awal, I remembered seeing very clearly there in the yard outside, by just there. He was just there lying in a pool of his own blood. And after we went outside, initially we were there outside. We didn't go anywhere. So this yard is enclosed inside the house. So we came out of the living room, as I mentioned. There's another door that closes it, so we're not really out in the open. There's no roof in, but it's still, we're not really outside in the open. So we didn't have access to where exactly the soldiers were, and they couldn't see us from where we were. And we waited there for a little bit. We tried to go outside initially to the next, there are multiple yards in the house, so we were going out into the next courtyard, but the door was, it looked like there's fire everywhere, and so we just came back and sat in this courtyard. And later on, someone checked if my grandmother passed away a few months before this, but her room, it's right there. So we checked inside the room. It's a little apartment inside our house, and we went in, and it looked like they weren't there as well. Her bedroom was, the walls have also fallen apart, but there's a living room, and we sat all in the living room and waited, for the fire, really. And as we were out there, where we were sitting in the room, it took a while, maybe a few hours, for the fires to get there. I forgot to mention, actually, that while we were in my dad's room, way before the the fire was set, at least way before the fire got to where we were, early in the morning, around 9 a.m. I think around 9 a.m. My dad's phone rang, and there was a call coming from someone who had called the night before that and said that they were calling from the Chief of Army Staff's office. And the night before, when they called, they asked if they could speak to my dad, and they said they would call back a few minutes later, but they didn't. But then the next morning, that on the 13th, they called again. And when they did, we assumed that they were trying to confirm, because earlier when they asked to speak with him, they said, okay, we'll call you in a few minutes, and then they didn't call again. We assumed that they were trying to check, maybe to hear his voice, affirm, is he there or is he not? Maybe is he alive still? So my mom picked up the phone, thinking that, if they are trying to check if he's alive, then she wouldn't let on.